But anyway, I am Veronica Mayer, class of 2005, and welcome to Self-Advocacy and Salary Negotiation. I am incredibly excited for today's conversation. If I look back on my life, and I'm sure many of you will feel the same way, the women of Williams have been incredibly important as I think about my professional career. Some of them are colleagues, Keeley here, one of them. I've had many mentors and some of the best sounding boards as I've made very pivotal career decisions. And so in this session today, we are going to learn about the critical importance of advocating for oneself, as well as learning how to effectively negotiate our salaries. I hope that coming out of this session, we will all have a better toolkit to further achieve our own career goals, as well as to be able to support other women of Williams as they are trying to do the same. The reason I'm standing in front of you today is because I am a member of the We Lead Advisory Board. We Lead is our women's philanthropy initiative. It is working toward closing the gap at the Alumnae funds of leadership gifts of $2,500 or more. At some point this weekend, I would love to chat with you more about it, as well as if you want to find other members of our advisory board. You can also scan the QR code on this bookmark. We have made a lot of progress over the last few years of working on this initiative, but we still have a lot of work to do and would love for you to get involved. So with that, it is my pleasure to hand this over to the very talented Blair Jones, class of 1989, as well as a parent to the class of 22.
Hi, thank you, Veronica. It's really nice to be with everybody today. I hope, given the size of the group, we can make this fairly interactive, because I know we probably have people from different walks of life and different experience sets. And I personally come from the business world, so I'll say right now most of my discussion points are going to come from the experiences there. I do consulting with boards, mainly of Fortune 500 companies, and working with their compensation committees. So I see a lot of women being developed within the executive ranks. I see the discussions about pay happening there. And then within our own consulting organization, I do a lot of mentoring of women. But I know there are women here who probably serve in academic settings, who might be in their own businesses, might serve in the government, and those are different systems. So, the richness of Williams, I welcome comments and additions from anybody who has different experience sets, or hands raised if what I'm saying really doesn't fit universally. So please feel free to speak up. I also welcome questions throughout. So we've got people with microphones, and we'll certainly open it up for Q&A at the end. But if there are things that are burning as we're talking about this, let's just go ahead and do that. But we set up this topic as both self-advocacy and pay negotiation, because while all of us care about pay, and as women, pay can be a scary thing to talk about. We've been taught to be polite when it comes to pay, and it was one of those things that you didn't talk about, whether it was religion or politics or pay. Those are things that never were supposed to come up in polite conversation. So while that's a very important thing for us to talk about, and I do want to spend time about how you prepare for those awkward conversations, one of the best ways that you can move yourself forward is through self-advocacy and working to make sure that you get in career opportunities that allow you to grow and develop and ultimately advance in your profession. So that's why we've coupled the two here. As I look at the statistics, and I know all of you have probably looked at them over time, it's pretty sobering, the statistics that are out there. On average, women make 83 cents on the dollar relative to men. And it's even worse if you have a bachelor's degree or an advanced degree. Those statistics are something like 76 or 77 cents when you look at more recent Department of Labor statistics. CEO World highlighted that women represent 58% of the workforce, but when you look at how many are in executive positions, we're lagging that. Only 35% of executive positions are held by women. So there's an opportunity there. And one of the messages I did want to convey at the start of this is there is a lot of energy around women in the workforce now. So my message to you would be it's a great time to be a woman in the workforce. At least on the public company side, they're clued into this as a priority. They see the value of diversity in the workforce, and they're doing many things to make sure that women get the leadership development that they need, and they're taking chances on opportunities for them. And also, they're focused on pay equity. And I thought I'd give you a couple of examples before we start into the different topics, but just recently, activist organization called As You Sow put out information about pay equity. And there's some pretty sad stories there about pay equity and companies that are lagging, but there are also some ones to celebrate. So for instance, Target has put out in their sustainability report information about their pay equity. And when I say pay equity, that means the median pay for females working in the workforce compared to men working in the workforce. And in this case, it's an unadjusted number. So it's not adjusted by tenure or role or experience or geography. It's just raw numbers. Target has achieved 100% pay equity. And that sets a standard. Now, Microsoft also put out a report, a D&I report this year, and they did something almost bolder. They're not at 100% yet. They actually reported that in the US, they're at 89.6% for women, so they've still got a gap, and globally, they're 86.2%. But I think what was noble about what they did is what they accompanied that set of statistics with, and here's what they said. As we continue to increase representation for women and racial and ethnic minorities at more senior levels and continue to ensure pay equity for all, the gap between the medians will reduce. The additional data transparency will help us to continue to strengthen our commitment to increasing representation at all levels and all roles. So in other words, by putting that statistic out there, they're elevating the issue, and they're saying we're going to get on top of it. And granted, these are two companies, but two companies can start a movement. And the more that gets talked about and the more pay equity discussions get elevated, the better. So just to finish my statement that it's a good time to be a woman, I work with about 28 different public company boards. And one of the things that is heartening about that is every one of them is doing an annual pay equity study. So they're presenting that to their boards, they're identifying the gaps, and they're talking with their boards about how they're going to address those gaps. There also are great companies. There's a new company called Syndio that is providing tools to companies. So even at the time they hire people, that they're looking at discrepancies and trying to help disparities. So probably not enough said, but be excited that this is a great time for women. So let's talk about how you can advocate for yourself. And we'll talk about that, like I said. Then we'll talk about pay negotiation. And finally, I thought I might spend a couple of minutes on the importance of having a coach or mentor or a sponsor and what that means. Good. So self-advocacy is all about self-reflection. It's about asking for feedback. It's about using data about yourself and using your community to get ahead. So there are three things that I thought we could talk about relative to self-advocacy. The first one, which is no surprise, is clarifying your goals. The second one is getting the feedback and the tools and resources you need to advance. And the third thing, for those of you who are marketers, is building your own brand. As women, I think we're much better advocates for our friends and our coworkers than we are for ourselves. And so one of the things as you think about your branding is to become your own best cheerleader. So I want to talk about that as well. Okay, so let's first talk about clarifying goals. And I know we've got people at different stages in their careers here. So if you're new in your career, in the first couple of years, take the time to reflect on why did you choose this job? What were you hoping to get out of it when you left Williams, when you entered this profession, or even for those of you who have now entered a second job, what were you hoping to accomplish? And have you held yourself accountable to that? You know, I mean, if it's helpful to you, put it down on paper, journal it, you know, and think and reflect about the ways that the job is delivering. For those of you who have been in a profession a little bit longer, you know, it's the time to think about, okay, I've got a certain set of skills. What do I like about what I've been doing? What do I not like about what I've been doing? You know, for those of you who were fortunate enough yesterday to hear Kristen Anderson Lopez, I was really keyed in to what she was saying is here she was acting, and she knew she loved musical theater, but as she reflected and was rewriting her story, she realized that what she really liked was the writing and the creative part. But she had only seen women role models doing acting and being on stage. And so as she reflected back and said, what do I really want to do? It brought her to an adjacent place, but a different place. So, you know, it's easy, I think, all of us are busy. That's, you know, one of the characteristics of us as Williams women. But take the time to reflect back and think about what you like and what you don't like, and then think about, therefore, what you need to get to that next level. Do you need to have experience with different, you know, to develop different kinds of skills? Maybe you've done all marketing and you'd like to have some operational experience. Maybe if you're in academia, you've always taught introductory classes and you want to teach some more advanced level classes to get a different feel for things. You know, if you're in a federal government job, maybe you've been doing work, you know, as a researcher, but you want to get some administrative experience. Clarify that for yourself. And then, you know, if you're even longer in the tooth, I think then, you know, you have the time to reflect on bigger changes. You know, is this organization going to fulfill you and do the right things for you? You know, and can you get your goals, or do you need to do it elsewhere? So clarifying your goals is a really important first step, and it's a really important first self-reflection. All of us get better at our self-reflection by then testing it with others. So I would encourage you, whether it's your Williams network or people within your peer group at work, or coaches, informal coaches or mentors that you've developed along the way, that you start to talk to them about it and say, I'm starting to think about this. You know, is this how you see me? You know, do you think I'm crazy to want to do this? You know, how would you think about it and enrich what I'm trying to do? Use your relationships that way. And I think, you know, women are particularly good at that, but you know, certainly men have been really important in my career in terms of redirecting me, and a lot of times people outside can take a more objective view of you. So once you've clarified your goals, you've done some initial testing, then it's time to talk to your boss. And that's a really important step. I think one of the things that's a risk is we assume that if we do good work, the rest will follow, our boss will recognize us and we'll get a next opportunity and somebody will figure it out for us. But if you've gone through all this work to think about what you really want, you need to share it. And hopefully, in most cases, you've got a boss who's receptive to it and wants to develop you. If you have a boss that isn't, that may be a sign that it's time for a change. But the conversation you want to have with your boss is, you know, here's what I'd like to do. Here's what I've done so far that I think leads me to this place. And, you know, can you help me make this happen? You know, you also want your boss to do the same feedback you were doing with your friends. Am I making too big a leap? You know, if I want to do this, can you help me? You know, how does it work within this organization? And hopefully your boss becomes one of your best advocates in that respect. I think that the risk that some run in addition to I'll do good work and the rest will follow and somebody's going to pick me up and give me good opportunities is just you let somebody else fill in the blanks for you. You know, I'm struck by how often people think, you know, with the boards I work on and we go through reviews of the senior executives, people say, oh, well, she's happy right now. You know, she's happy. And, you know, I think that's sad. I mean, it's a two-way street. I mean, first of all, the boss should have asked and said, are you happy? And are we doing everything? But you need to do your part of it as well, because I think that's a missed opportunity. I think the other thing relative to assumptions is people make assumptions about us as women. If you're a woman who chooses to have a family, people say, oh, well, she's a mother, so she's got to balance too much, so maybe she's not the best person for this job. You know, and knowing little about what your significant other does, what processes you have in place, and what your ambitions are. But that's a very, very common assumption. I had a man tell me, well, people like you, they're very ambitious until their children reach about second grade, and then they can't really do it anymore. They find it's too hard. And so don't let them have that assumption about you. Likewise, if you're somebody who's chosen not to have kids, I think it can be equally hard because people assume that therefore you're dedicated to your work and you're willing to work long hours and take life sacrifices, and that's not fair either. So all of this is about, you know, having your own story with your boss and bringing them into the conversation so they can support you. You know, and since this is also about pay, this is also a good time to have a little bit of the pay conversation. I mean, this is hopefully a conversation you're having with your boss you get on a regular cadence, whether it's quarterly or semi-annually. But quarterly or semi-annually, they're also going to be giving you a pay review. So this is a good time to say, okay, well, I see the pay you've given me. What's the range of pay for people in my level? And what would be the next range of pay? And when you give me a bonus, how do you decide what that bonus is? You know, just start gathering your market data, and we can put a pin in that because when we get to the pay negotiation part, I'm going to say do your research. So start to understand, and those are fair questions to ask. You know, just be curious. You're doing it without an agenda, but you're trying to understand how things work in your organization and how you get ahead, particularly how you get ahead from an opportunity and a rewards standpoint. So you use your boss to help in that regard. And then the next thing, so that's about goals and communicating them, okay? So that's item one. Item two in advocating for yourself is getting support and resources that you need to succeed. So here's an ask you can make that is compensatory, but it's not direct salary. So for those of you who may be 5, 6, 7 years out, ask your boss if you can do some of the evaluations, whether it's Myers-Briggs or Strength Finders or DISC. They're all good. And if you've done one of them before, ask if you can do another one. Those are good ways to take stake of who you are, good ways to get new language around what your strengths are. And I don't know whether, as I'm saying this, like, so Myers-Briggs is a little bit about your preferences in terms of how you make decisions and approach the world. And it divides things into personality types like introverts and extroverts, whether you make your decisions based on facts and analytics versus feeling, whether you're somebody who makes inductive types of decisions or whether you need to build things up deductively, and whether you're somebody who needs to be organized and have deadlines, or somebody who is a little bit more creative and leaves deadlines up in the air. And that's important for getting to know yourself, but it's also important for how you work with other people. It gives you, to the extent you're trying to move into a leadership position, not everybody's like you. You know, I mean, you've got your unique profile, and people you work with have their unique profiles, and understanding more about yourself enables you, again, then to advance your careers. Strength Finders is one I particularly love because it goes on the premise, it's a Gallup product, but it goes on the premise that we focus too much on the flat sides we have and not enough on the strengths. And so it helps you identify what your strengths are as an individual, and then you can think about, okay, how do I complement those strengths with other people, and how do I work with people that way? So if you haven't done that, as you're, like I said, getting to a point where you've been in the career world, that can be a good way to explore. You can also do exploration, again, if you're a little bit longer in the tooth, do a 360 type of review. Presumably you're in a management position, so a 360 review allows you to get feedback from individuals who report to you, individuals who are peers, and individuals who are superiors to get a sense of how you lead. Then you can take that, and there's coursework you can do. There's the Center for Creative Leadership, or maybe you want to take coursework, maybe you've been in human resources all your career and you want to go into finance. So you could take finance courses at one of the many business schools that have executive education. So, in terms of advocating for your career and getting ahead, once you have goals, don't hesitate to ask for things that will help you understand yourself more, and also things that will help you get further ahead. So that's item 2. And item 3 is this idea of building your own brand. Again, as I mentioned, so many times we're so much better as women at recognizing the strengths of others, and I can say, oh, XYZ is the best person I know on client relationships, or this person is the most creative thinker. And what I'm asking you to do is to turn that on yourself. As you look at what you've done well over time, what are you uniquely good at? Are you great at building teams? Are you a great turnaround person? Are you great at coming up with frameworks that help your team solve problems? Are you great analytically? Nothing makes you happier than to get into a model and do Excel. All of those things. Are you a great writer? Are you a great ambassador for your group with other groups? Are you glue that holds things together? All of those are valuable skills, and getting in touch with what those are is a really, really important part of your self-advocacy. Now, I got a good idea from one of my clients that they do, because I think it is hard to be your own cheerleader. And what she has done, she's somebody who joined an organization from another organization, so it was particularly important to her in that regard. She put together a little bio on herself. And when she's going into a meeting, either with her boss's boss, or with someone in another group, or with a team that she's working on, she just attaches her bio or sends it to the assistant of the individual and just says, just so you know, here's who I am. And here are the kinds of projects I've been working on, and here are the things I brought from my other company. It is a little bold, but at the same time, it's subtle, right? She's just putting that as background. And I think we think sometimes that, people are thinking about us all the time, and if you think about other teams, they've got other things going on, or bosses, they've got other things going on, so you're just helping ground them. And so I thought that was a great idea. So really think about what your superpower is and use that to your advantage, and use that to advocate for yourself and your position on your team, and even to advocate for your next roles. So for instance, if your superpower has been building new businesses or new channel opportunities within a company, and you have done it at the division level, but you haven't done it at the enterprise level, okay, your superpower is building things. Get somebody to take a bet on you that you can do it at the enterprise level, and go back, we'll be circular here, go back to your feedback with your boss and your boss's boss about, okay, how do I make that transition from division to enterprise? What didn't I know? Or if you are somebody who is in an academic setting and you've been in the classroom all your life, and all of a sudden you're asked to be a dean, okay, you know the academic world, and your superpower might be that you're one of the greatest teachers ever, and you have such a good pulse on the relationship between students and professors and what that should be. How do you take that knowledge base and put it into a more administrative role and make more of it? So again, come from a position of strength, advocate for yourself, and use that skill as you move forward. And I think as you're building your brand, that's your opportunity to reach out to new parts of the organization as well. So perhaps instead of just operating within the group you're in, you join a cross-functional team, right? Or you ask to be involved in a community initiative that's going on. Perhaps there's a community initiative with, helping with writing in underprivileged areas, and your superpower is that you're a great writer. Get involved in those things because that expands your brand beyond your group and the individuals you're working with, and allows more people to get to know you. It allows more people to hear about you, and again, helps you advance over time within the organization. And then also maybe you find out something you didn't know about the organization and you find yourself an opportunity. And then the last thing about building your own brand and advocating for yourself is go for those opportunities. I think that as I've watched women over time, and the research would prove this out, that unlike men, women wait to make sure they've checked every box before they apply for a position. They want to make sure that they're uniquely qualified and can answer every question, whereas men, and not, my husband reminds me, not every man, but men more generally would go for it and be a little bit bolder on that. I think that one of the things that I would urge you to do is, what's the worst that can happen? You don't get the job. And I think, but therein lies an opportunity, right? You have to think about a no as a not now, and ask for feedback about why you didn't get that job. Keep in touch with the people who were selecting that job, because maybe when the next thing comes up, they've learned some unique things about you that they see operate elsewhere. So think a little bit creatively, again, in this whole branding sphere, about trying some new things out, whether it's, like I said, broader initiatives, community involvement, trying for new jobs, and take the opportunity to get who you are out there and expand your relationships and network. So that's self-advocacy. Self-advocacy, again, is about clarifying goals. It's about asking for support, and it's about building your brand. So, it would be nice, again, if we just did that and the pay followed, but sometimes we have to have those hard pay conversations. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about pay negotiation. I don't know, how many people have had very awkward conversations about pay in their organizations? Yeah, okay. It's something that, there's nothing fun about it, right? It's nothing fun about it. And it's particularly hard when it comes from a point of comparison, where you're looking around you and you're seeing that others in the organization doing similar jobs are paid more, either because they came from the outside or maybe they have a boss that advocates for them more. And those are really hard things to swallow. Or sometimes it's just the way the organization works that, I know I've heard so many times, sadly, from people that they feel like the only way to advance their pay in their career is to leave an organization and then come back. And that shouldn't have to happen. It really shouldn't have to happen. And I did look at some of the research, which is not going to be a surprise to you because it all confirms what we've all heard, but I'll just, say it for completeness purposes. The reason this happens with women is that, this happens to be from the International Journal of Business Pay Raises. I was like, it's interesting that there's a journal on this. But compared to men, women feel more likely to, are more likely to feel anxious and less entitled during negotiation, and regard negotiation as a social disapproval behavior that violates expected gender roles. So just think about that. that you're having to overcome as a woman, that you're not supposed to negotiate, that society doesn't expect you to negotiate, and that's really not fair. It's not fair at all. And then that translates into, and this was from a Pew Research Center study that just came out in April, that men are more likely than women to ask for higher pay than what was offered. So this would be in the situation where you've got a new job. Women were less comfortable asking. So again, that's probably not new news to you. The research continues to show that. So knowing that it's uncomfortable and knowing how many people raise their hands that you've had an uncomfortable situation, how can you best arm yourselves? There are a few things to think about here. What you're trying to do ultimately is be much more fact-based and data-based to take the emotion out of it. That's your goal. So in order to do that, you've got to first assess the market and the context. The second thing you need to do is take the time to build your rationale. Then you can make the ask. But you want to do those first two things first. So when we're talking about assessing the market, what does that look like? The good news for you is there's a lot more data out there than there used to be. So for instance, in places like New York and California, when a job is posted, it has to be posted with the job range. And there's been a lot of discussion. Sometimes those job ranges are a little crazy, but it's data, right? So you can go out and you can look at what similar jobs to what you're looking at are paid. So that's one thing. The second thing that you can do is look for other survey or published data. So if you're in the legal field, there are all sorts of studies that come out about what lawyers are paid in different parts of the country and different kinds of professions, et cetera. So those kinds of things you can look for as well. There are surveys out there. Some of them are public and some of them are private. But use your relationships and friendships to find out, what data is out there. You can also go to some crowdsourced data. For the tech industry, there's a crowdsourced site called levels.fyi that's fairly reliable. Glassdoor also has some data. You need to be a little more suspect of that data because it is crowdsourced, but again, it's a data point that you can rely on. I didn't want to forget that I said put a pin in the self-advocacy point. Hopefully you've been having conversations with your manager about your goals the whole time, and as you get feedback and you get your pay tier, you're using that opportunity to ask about pay ranges in the organization, both for the role you're in and for the next level. That's data too, right? And so those are comfortable times to ask about pay because you're getting pay information and maybe you don't have an agenda then, but make sure you have that and you keep that there. You can reach out to your network, like your Williams network. It's a little awkward to just ask about pay. I think, if you're reaching out to your Williams network, you also want to talk about the role and what they've learned and what the value is, but you can use your Williams network. And sometimes you can use people within the organization, although there's a lot of misinformation if you're using information from others in your peer network. I think the one time when that data is important for you to raise is when you have somebody reporting to you who's been brought in that's paid higher, or people have been brought in from the outside, and because they've come from the outside, whereas you've been inside, they're being paid at a higher level. That data is important to bring to the fore. You want to gather pay data. The other thing you want to understand is how pay decisions work in your organization. And I wouldn't want to underestimate this because all organizations are different. Some organizations are very transparent. So they say, here's what's paid at each level in the organization, and here's what you could expect over different periods of time. Others, it's a total black box. Some, they don't give you a pay raise unless you ask for it. Some have a standard way of raising, and you might get more if you're on a faster trajectory. So I have one client who has a combination of you've been here 3 years and your performance is at the highest level, so you get a higher level of increase, for instance. So it's really important to know that. You also need to know whether it's the culture of the organization of ask for the moon and maybe you'll get, somewhere closer to Earth, or whether they want you to ask for a realistic number. If you're looking at a new organization and looking for pay, use your headhunter or your recruiter that you're working with to try to get a sense of what's realistic and how the organization works. The other thing I wanted to say, and again, still in this bucket of gathering data, is understanding that your manager is working with a budget, most likely. So they have a budget, and pay can be one of 3 components. There are base salaries, and so they have a budget about how much they can do the increases, somewhere between 3, 5. This year, some of them went up to 7 or 8%, but around 3%. They have bonuses that they can give, and that can vary each year based on your individual performance, so they have some latitude there. And then they have an equity budget. And that also can vary, they have a budget to work within, but that's one that they would vary based on performance. And sometimes there's supplemental budgets that don't sit with your manager, but sit higher in the organization that they can advocate to have you get what's called something like a chairman's award. So the latter 2 are good things to think about if you've had a bang out year, if you had a great project and it just had great results, or, if you, did something that changed the nature of the work in your organization, bonus or equity, depending on your level and whether that's available, are good opportunities for you. So it is important to understand all of that, and also understand that when your boss is making decisions, they're making decisions. If they're going to give you more, they have to give somebody else less. And so timing is everything on these kind of things. So that would take me to point 2 in negotiating for your salary, and that's building the rationale. And even before you start to build the rationale for a raise, one of the things I'd suggest is keeping some sort of journal of all the work that you've done. You think that you're living it, and sometimes it's hard for you to remember what happened at the beginning of the year versus the end of the year because you're focused on what you're focused on. It's even harder for your boss. So start the habit of keeping some sort of log of what you've been working on, what you've accomplished, any feedback you've received. Let's say your customer said, this is the greatest thing ever and it's helped us save, this much cost. Capture all of those things. This is in the spirit, again, of self-advocacy. Capture all of those things. So as you build your rationale, your most important and most compelling point, absent this place, and we'll talk about in a minute, the fairness thing where somebody's been brought from the outside, is showing your business or organizational impact. I changed the way we worked as an organization. I saved the organization this much cost. I got us access to this new set of customers. I created a new course. If you're, I created a new training, any of those kind of things. And here's how many people showed up, and here's the evaluations I got. Data-based, organization-based, how did you help? And most importantly, think about it with your boss's hat on. How are you going to help your boss achieve their goals? If you achieve that, what does that mean for your boss, right? Because they need to be your advocate for the additional dollars. So it's really important to take that time. And you'll notice that in this one, I said, don't compare yourself to others. You don't want to say, well, Susie over here did this and I did this. Do it about what you uniquely did. So that's one rationale. If you have the case, and this has happened more often in recent years because of the Great Resignation and the amount of churn going on, if you have a circumstance where people have been brought in with higher pay than you, or you come to find over time that you've been in an organization and they are paying higher, one, you want to make sure you have your facts right. But my suggestion there is to put the facts down, to put what you've done, again, same process of here's what I do for the organization and here's how I help you, boss, do better. But go with more of a curiosity, like, help me understand what's happening here and how's the organization thinking about it. If you're bringing all these people in, it seems unfair, because I'm looking at the facts. And because putting them on the defensive is probably not going to help your case. And I think, again, as women, we can use our ability to be more relationship-oriented, to still be hard on it. You're trying to get an answer. You're not going to wimp away. They're not going to say, well, you just have to live with it. It's bad luck. You have to say, this is making me think hard about my future here, and maybe what I need, So I think that's important. So again, gather data about what's happening in the marketplace and how your organization works and makes decisions about pay. Get your rationale. And then you're ready to talk to your boss. And so I think my advice there would be, if you're going to talk to your boss about pay when you set it up, probably tell them I want to have a conversation about pay. Because the worst thing to do is to come in and surprise them. They think you're going to have a nice conversation about your career, and you really want to talk about pay. So, I would be, again, not adversarial, but just, I want to talk to you about my pay, and you could say, and my career, but make sure that happens. And then when you go into the room, you want to set the right tone, right? I mean, you have a relationship with your boss, but don't beat around the bush too long. And just, I think you can be vulnerable and say, this is really hard for me, but I've taken some time and I've thought about the conversations you and I have had about my goals, and I've thought about all these things I've accomplished this year. And, here are all the things that I've added to the organization, and when I look at my pay decision, it just doesn't seem to reflect that. Or if you're thinking about my pay decision, how are you going to take into account these things if they haven't already made the decision? Again, in the spirit of self-advocacy, you want your boss to be your best advocate for you. So to the extent you can bring them into the equation and have them work with you, that's a better situation than not. If it's about fairness, you're coming in and you're saying, okay, I've gathered this data. Here's what I see that I contribute to the organization. And all of a sudden it feels out of sync. Help me understand how the organization's thinking about it. I think it needs to be corrected. What are you guys thinking about? Again, don't assume they haven't been thinking about it, because then you put them in a defensive posture. And again, you want them to be an advocate for you to try to figure it out. Those situations do come with anger and frustration, but try to take the emotion out of it and assume good intent first. If you can't come to a resolution, then I think you have a different story. You can try to go to your boss's boss and do that, which is always a little tricky. Or maybe you have to think about going somewhere else, because from a values perspective, perhaps they aren't aligned. The worst thing you can do in these organizations is make a threat. And it's very easy for all of us when we get emotional to say, if I am not going to get this, I'm just going to leave. I'm thinking about a client that I have who's very, very talented. And she is in an organization that's in a turnaround. So it's hard times. And the money is probably going to come longer term than near term. And she fairly and rightly went out and tested the market. And lo and behold, she got an offer. And she got a good offer from a comparable company. And it was real. And so all of that was okay. I think that, and she was inarguably excellent, but where she went wrong is, instead of following this process and bringing her boss into the conversation as her advocate, she said, I've got this offer, and if you can't match it, I leave. And I will tell you, the board who had to approve this pay still talks about that. And it could have gone way differently if she had said, brought her boss in and says, here's what I see about the pros of staying with this organization, and here's what I think I'm bringing and what I'd like to continue to bring. Here's what I see about the pros and cons of this other organization, but I've got this other offer, and it's really, really hard to think about it. Then you have a constructive conversation versus deliver or I'll leave. So really be careful about the threat side of things. So that would be my number one: no surprises and no threats. So, I mean, and then the final thing I wanted to say about pay negotiation, or I guess final two things, is think creatively about pay. So we talked about pay, and it depends on your level of the organization, and it depends on the kind of organization you're in. It's either a salary, a bonus, or equity. But let's say you're in an organization that just can't right now. You know, and I work with a lot of organizations in transitions, and sometimes they just can't. Pay is often more than just the direct pay. It's about career opportunities. It's about your ability to work from home. It's about the culture. It's about the leadership development investment that they'll make in you. It's about your colleagues. And, you know, so if you get a no, can you negotiate for something else? Bless you, bless you. Can you negotiate for something else? You know, maybe you can negotiate for them to pay for a course that you really want to take. If you go back to your goals and the things you're trying to achieve, maybe they'll pay for that. And, you know, and that's value to you. And, you know, I mean, ultimately, again, if you're not advancing at a pace you want and your pay's not moving at a pace you want, you may need to go. But can you get something else if you really like where you are and you believe them, you trust them? You know, can you get coursework? Can you work another day from home? Could you say, you know what, I really would like to get included on this team? All of those things are compensatory and developing your, you know, it's a long-term versus short-term type of answer. And the other thing I would say is, you know, in addition to being creative about pay, is that if it's a no, don't just say, okay, thank you for considering, and would you consider these other things, but say, you know, I still do want to talk about my pay. Could we, you know, can I be clear about why you know, what I need to do to get an increase, and could we talk again in 6 months? So you're getting a commitment from your boss to have another conversation. So again, it's not a no, it's a not now, but you're advocating for yourself, and you're saying, okay, I like this organization well enough, maybe I'm able to negotiate for a little bit more career development, whether it's a team I want to be on, or a course I want to take, or, you know, some sort of new management role or informal management role, but I want to talk again in 6 months. And you know, what would you like to see when we talk again in 6 months? And I'm just saying 6 months, it doesn't need to be 6 months. So I would say that that's absolutely important. So we've talked a lot about relative to pay. So just to summarize, you know, make sure you do your market research, build your rationale, try to talk to your boss in a constructive way, holding your ground. I'm not in any way telling you to not hold your ground. Do not put your tail between your legs and leave, you know, if you don't get what you want. You know, maybe you even retreat and say, wasn't how I expected this conversation to go. May I talk to you again in a week? You know, so you retreat, come back with more conversation. So be bold and strong for yourself, so you feel satisfied. And then just think more creatively about the no's and what else is available. And I guess I would say that with offers too, for those of you looking at new jobs. Just make sure you understand everything about the offer, because the money's not all of it. Make sure you understand everything you're getting. And also, make sure you understand everything you're getting, and put it on paper even, so you understand what the non-financial things are. And also make clear to your boss what they're going to get in return. Like, you're willing to stay another couple of years. You know, if they give you this raise, you're willing to take on something that maybe is a little less savory, but you're willing to do that. You know, think of that as well. So really hard conversations, but try to remove the emotion from them by going through a process and having good and constructive conversations. So that's item 2. And then the final thing is, none of us can get there alone. We depend on others. And so use the relationships that you've built. There are coaches out there, and some of them are informal. People who just know how things work, they've been around, and they can help you. and welcome those people. You know, they might be a wise person who's a couple years ahead of you. They, you know, might be someone more senior in the organization. And again, when we go back to the self-advocacy, you could even ask for a formal coach. You know, again, if you're, you know, 6, 7, 8 years into your career and you're trying to strengthen yourself, that's another way to develop your career. Ask for a coach. Coaches are really good at holding the mirror to you. The second thing is a mentor, and a mentor is somebody who's more invested in your development. And mentors, you know, sometimes companies will assign people to be your mentors. That rarely works. So look for those people who take a liking to you, you know, and maybe it's somebody on one of these cross-functional initiatives you work on, or maybe it's somebody in a different department from how you are, and, you know, use them. You know, they're invested in you, and use them to both truth tell, to push you, and to help you excel. And if you're very fortunate, you get a sponsor. And that's somebody who's going to go to the mat for you every day of the week. And again, you can't just go to somebody and say, please be my sponsor. But as you get close to people, you know, look for those opportunities and look for those people you really click with and people who tend to take a liking. And, you know, whether you try to get on a project with them to get to know them better, or you just, you know, get on a regular schedule with them once a month that you're having lunch or coffee or something like that, use your community to move your career forward. So we've talked about a lot. I am sure there are other experiences in the room that can add, and there may be questions that you have, but I think I'll just, you know, I'll sum up. You know, I was thinking of this, and I thought, you know, as I'm saying all of this, it sort of sounds like this whole series of truisms of toot your own horn, you know, nothing ventured, nothing gained, and you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. And you know, I hope that you'll take away a few more substantive things about, you know, there are lots of opportunities for women out there. Organizations now more than ever want women to get ahead. If you do your homework, clarifying your goals, understanding the market data and how things get done, you ask for feedback, you build rationale, and you use the relationships and networks you have. So you know, I don't know why everybody came into here, but for those of you who are seeking an increase or changing jobs and asking, I hope you got some good ideas, and I will open it up to questions at this point. Oh yeah, and I didn't realize we're long. I didn't see your things at all, so we'll take one question and then go.
So Blair, actually, Ann Carson, 89, and a friend of Blair's. This was fabulous. I'm actually past the point of negotiating pay, and I'd like to make a comment, which is, I want to add on to what Blair said about non-pay compensation. And when you're going in the front, to not forget about things like benefits and leave and retirement and paying yourself first, because you will be surprised when you're 5 and 10 years in, for those who are just starting out, how much having an extra week's leave makes a difference every year. Or how much, as you're looking to retire, having access to health care benefits that you may have in your retirement, or additional retirement benefits will mean to you. And you don't think of those when you're in your 20s, but you think of them when you're in your 40s and your 50s. So just to add on to Blair's.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I apologize for going over. I had intended to leave time for questions, so I'll stay here if anybody wants to talk. But
hello, I'm Beth Connolly Caputi, class of 82, and I work for myself. And so I set my own pay scale, if you will. And I will say that I struggled with what my worth was, what my hourly worth was. And now I've, 15 years into this project, I now have, I guess, the benefit in a way, or I can share with people who are also heading into their own, whether it's a change or to try and have that confidence to say, I am worth X number of dollars. And the one frustration is there isn't really that, well, what do other people who do what I do. What do they charge? And fortunately for me, I had people who, and maybe you guys have heard this, that you don't want to be the cheapest person because then they think you don't really have much of a product. You don't necessarily want to be the most outrageously expensive person. So it's finding that sweet spot of, it's kind of like, do you buy a cheap diamond? Do you buy a really expensive diamond, or something right there in the middle? But I just don't know. I mean, I think I'm at a point now where I'm not going to up my rates or anything like that, but it took me a really long time to get to where I am now, 15 years later, so, and which is kind of my late in life career. I don't know what I'm really saying, but I guess it's just different from what you've addressed.
It's totally different. But you could use some of the same market gathering. If you have a client that's a long-term client, you can ask them what they're paying for similar services. If it's somebody who you have a great coach, who would be an internal coach for you. There are also a lot of professional organizations that bring together entrepreneurs, and you can trade stories with them and kind of gather informal crowdsource data that way too. So yeah. So, thank you. Thank you, everybody.